今天很荣幸邀请到一位加拿大土生土长的创业小哥，23岁，但想法非常成熟，15岁就开始工作了，和我读的同一个游戏开发专业，但人家大一结束就开始在一家初创公司做软件开发。目前除了主职工作，还有3个事业在同时进行。在采访中，他把很多经历和想法和盘托出，毫无保留，而且娓娓道来，非常真诚。我自认收获了很多。也许大家未必都会去创业，我也不推荐所有人都去创业，但你可以站在一个青年创业者的角度来看待这个社会，也许能窥到一些机会。他对加拿大还是比较有信心的，我们也可以听听看一个加拿大人是怎么看待这个国家的。其实我一开始没打算录像，只是想先聊聊，了解一下。结果听了几句话，我就知道是非常有价值的内容，所以赶紧请求做成采访。视频有点长，花了很多时间在翻译上，希望大家点赞、关注、收藏。
Yeah, and I appreciate that, doing this kind of interview.
Yeah, no worries. I'm always happy to chat. I apologize for taking so long to get back to you. But yeah, when I do have time, I'm always happy to chat about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, especially like from your age, 23 years old. I've actually met a few people already. Like they have very mature mindsets, just like you, and they are very successful in their age. I'm curious about your background. Like, where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Canada in a small town. Well, small at times, it's a little bit bigger now, called London, Ontario. My parents were actually, well, my dad was more of a refugee. But I think they were both asylum seekers from like the aftermath of the Vietnam War, because after the Vietnam War, there was a couple other conflicts that happened, and there's a little bit more to that as well, given that like it was in the Mekong Delta area, and my dad was also of a Cambodian ethnic background, so they really came to Canada with like next to nothing. So growing up, seeing them work so hard, it really like kind of shaped my work ethic as well. But it also was a little bit of an inspiration because we lived in this place literally called Cheapside Apartments. So like it cannot get more embarrassing than that. And I saw my dad, from the age of 4 to 8, literally like lift us out of poverty. And we even were able to like buy our own freehold home and go from this not so wealthy area to a bit of a better area. And I saw him do that in 4 years, and I was like, oh wow, that's great. And then we went from like owning, well, we used to take public transportation to owning 2 vehicles. And again, this is all on like two uneducated salaries. And it was just through grit. There's always the option of working smarter. There's the option of working harder. They had to work harder, and seeing that work ethic really shaped, my worldview growing up. The area I was in also didn't isn't really like a tech sector as well. So I had to create my own opportunities because there were none for me.
Yeah, for some reason, when I first saw your name, I thought you're from Korea.
Yeah, a lot
Uh,
of people do. No, there's it kind of coincides with my background story I just told you. A couple generations ago, we had to change our last name because the last name we had at the time like was it was undergoing like this ethnic massacre, this ethnic genocide of that last name. So we had to like change our last name
mm,
to avoid that massacre. Like it was not going well over there in
mm.
Southeast Asia, but I'm sure your viewers and anyone with some knowledge of Asian history knows that.
Yeah, I guess we've all been there.
Yeah.
Well, not exactly the same kind of experience, but like the Chinese people suffered too.
Yeah.
So back to our previous topic about like entrepreneurship. How did you get started? And like people are worried about like the economy. How did you get the courage to start your own side hustle?
Yeah, so I mentioned that when I was younger, a lot of my friends they've picked up their careers. Like one of my closest friends when I was younger wanted to be a firefighter. And something we would do in our spare time, we would like sit on these steps across the street from the fire station and we just watch the fire trucks go and drive around the city. And he was like, that's gonna be me one day. And I'm just sitting there like, I don't really know what it entails to be a firefighter. So I don't know if that's for me. It wasn't until I reached, high school, grade 9, we had this class called Civics and Careers, and in the careers portion, I got a field trip over to the United Nations. There's this lady in the United Nations headquarters in New York. She asked my group, "What do you guys want to be when you grow up?" And all my friends were saying, "Oh, I want to be doctors, I want to be lawyers, I want to be engineers." And I'm over here like, I don't really know. Because I missed the memo that we were supposed to be like we were supposed to pick out like an industry or career we wanted to be in, and that's supposed to be our passion and purpose in life. I never really saw life that way. The way I saw life was we have skills, and those skills can be tools to achieve what we have in mind. And I really enjoyed solving puzzles and problems and creating solutions. So when there was like a problem that I cared about, I would use my skills to solve it. I watched a lot of documentaries growing up of like inventors. I watched a documentary when I was like 7 years old about the guy who invented air conditioning. I was like, well, that's cool. So that's kind of the mindset I had growing up. I wanted to create things to solve problems, so those problems that are bothering me don't exist anymore. I've always had an entrepreneurial mindset. It wasn't until I was older that I had like this fear instilled into me, or I guess reality maybe. Like I was in high school, I was working like this minimum wage job, so I experienced what it was like, living paycheck to paycheck. And when I wasn't working and I wasn't in school, I noticed like in social media, but also the way people talk to each other, saying things like, "Oh, I'll never own a home. Oh, like it's so difficult to get a job with this useless degree." But the thing is, they would also make fun of entrepreneurial mindsets. Some of those entrepreneurial mindsets were maybe kind of silly, or maybe they were just the popular memes at the time. Like we made fun of like SoundCloud rappers and stuff like that. And there's the whole crypto bro thing, which I was actually kind of one of. And maybe in fear of being socially displaced, I wasn't really as outward and outgoing about my entrepreneurial mindset than most people. So that fear got instilled in me until I started working for other founders and small businesses and startups. I was lucky to decide, maybe when I was 16, that I wanted to work for like an ISP, an internet service provider. And then like a year later, I got a job at an internet service provider, very small one in the city of London. And when it finally came time for me to move cities here to Ottawa, and I had to leave that job, while we were parting ways, the owner of the company told me that I seemed like somebody who's going to be just okay. I seem like somebody who's going to start his own business one day. And that really alleviated and released some of that fear that was instilled into me the couple years prior. But, that didn't really alleviate the fact that I was still a broke college student. So, I moved to Ottawa and I needed a way to pay rent and pay for school tuition. So I worked my part-time jobs until it was just like, why am I working part-time jobs when I'm in school for programming? I should just get programming experience, because that's what I wanted to do at the time. So I was lucky to get a software developer job after finishing year one of our program. Again, small-ish startup at the time. Well, they were late stage startup, which is really useful, and I'm gonna talk more about that later. But when I was interviewing for that company, one of the really unique and cool things they did was you have a one-on-one interview, just a personality interview, talking about your life story with one of the founders of the company. And one of the founders of the company, after hearing my life story, he was like, "I don't think you should be working here. You seem like somebody who should start his own business." Yeah, and I was like, "No, no, no," because I was so broke and I needed the money. I was like, "No, I'd rather just work for you." And there was still some of that fear left, of wanting to do something on my own, because now I was paying rent, I was paying all my own bills, I was paying for school. It's like, this is reality, and the reality is it's rough. But after working for his company for a couple of years, it was very inspirational. The way he set up his company, the way the culture is, and just seeing the late stage startup flourish really inspired me, because it really made me think I could do it too. They involved me, which was really great. I was like 19, 20 years old at the time. And they involved me in a lot of the decisions, which led it to flourish. And I was like, wow, I'm a part of this. Sometime in 2021 or 2022, the company got bought out by a much larger company. And for most startups, that's success, right? You make a company to get bought out for lots of money. I think it's called like the Silicon Valley method or something. And the amount they got bought out for was something like obscene, something ridiculous. I can't wrap my mind around, and I still can't wrap my mind around this kind of money. I don't remember how much it was. I have to check on Crunchbase or something. I think it was like 300 to 500 million dollars. And they started the company 7 years ago. So, you do the math, it's a lot of money. And I was like, whoa, that's awesome. I'm really happy for the company. I'm really happy for everyone else. But I kind of feel like I was a part of that, and I feel like why am I making somebody else wealth when I could just make myself wealth? And that kind of coincides with what I was telling you earlier about how I see skills as a tool to solve a solution. There just wasn't a problem I cared about enough to really go out on a whim yet. So at the end of that job, I didn't want to leave that job, but I had to take 6 months off because I learned my grandmother was really sick. She had terminal cancer. So I flew to the other side of the world in Vietnam, in rural Vietnam, so inside the jungle still. And I just wanted to spend as much time with her as possible. And I'm seeing like all these problems in rural areas. Hospitals were hours away. Even in Canada, I think I saw one of the videos on your Bilibili account of like the wait times in the hospital. It was ridiculous, right?
Right.
Yeah, no, we have that problem in Vietnam too. I guess it's a problem everywhere. And it's like it's ridiculous. But my aunts and uncles in that village, they definitely had the mindset of engineers, maybe without the proper education. But I saw them basically buy like medical equipment, like hospital grade medical equipment off of our version of Amazon or Alibaba, put it in her room in the village, set it up so that she had all the same vital monitors that the hospital we were going to had, because my grandma didn't like the 2 hour rides to the hospital just to wait, hours to see a doctor. It was ridiculous. And then they hired a doctor in a nearby town to basically be her personal doctor. Whenever she was feeling unwell or one of the machines were giving a bad reading, they would FaceTime the doctor and like point the camera at the machines. It was so weirdly put together, but it was great. It was probably the best healthcare in the area. And I was just thinking to myself, Canada's a first world country. We're one of the G7. Like, why don't we have this? A bunch of villagers in, a small village of maybe 50 people in Vietnam in the jungle just created this. Why doesn't Vietnam have this? This is a problem I do care about because I'm with my grandma for 6 months. I'm seeing her suffer, and I don't want other people to suffer like this. So that's when I realized I did have the skills for this. I did have the tools for this. And that's when I started my entrepreneurial journey to finally set out with all the lessons I've learned, working with other founders, with what I've seen. And I think the underlying thing from all of this was I had the drive and passion. A part of it was I'm doing it for myself. I want to build wealth and I want to work for myself. But another part of it is I'm doing it for my family. I'm doing it for my grandma. I'm doing it for every single person that has had suffered issues from our, archaic healthcare system. And that drive kept me going. And I think that's what made me take the risk.
Wow. Wow. That's really respectable, to be honest.
Thank you.
It's a noble drive, and I think you're destined to gain support from others, even from the government, right? I think that's the gist of creating a business. You have a real problem to solve, and you want to create value for the society. So, do you see Canada as a good place for entrepreneurship?
I do think of it as a good place for entrepreneurship. I'm maybe a little biased because I work in the Department of Canada that contributes to entrepreneurship. But when I was a little bit younger, I want to say 19, 20, and I was working for that software startup, one of the really cool things about that company was it was remote anywhere in the world. So sometimes I would just fly to random places. So I flew to Alberta, Canada, Alberta, Calgary, sorry. And I attended like this science museum night. And I talked to this engineer at or this professor in the engineering department at the University of Calgary. And I asked him for some advice, like I went to college like you to do game development. And I chose game development because, well, when you give a 17-year-old a decision, what do they want to study? Of course, it's going to be video games. But it wasn't until later that I was like, oh, maybe I want to do engineering. And I asked him, like, how did he know that he wanted to do engineering and why University of Calgary? And he gave me the most simple answer, which I think is probably one of the best answers I've received. I just used what I had. I was already in Calgary, so that's why I studied at the University of Calgary. And when I graduated, they happened to have a job, so I took the job. And it's simplistic. It might bore a lot of people, but it was the answer I needed. People want to find like the special time, special place where everything aligns and it's correct. And they ignore what's right in front of them. So for me, I was born in Canada. I have a Canadian citizenship, and right now I don't have any other passports or any other citizenships. So I can't really control that right now. So what I have is I'm in Canada and I live under, the Canadian government. So is it good? Yes, I do think it's good. But if I was anywhere else, if I was born in Vietnam, it's just what I have. The most important thing is I get started and I understand the environment I am in. Luckily, the Canadian government, we have a lot of social safety nets for people to take risks. We have, public health care. You might be waiting 6, 12, 16 hours in a hospital, but you will get your health care. We have employment insurance. If you lose your job, the government will pay you up to, I think, 8 or 9 months until you find another job. That's a lot of time. We have the Canadian pension plan. You can spend your entire life, working a job that maybe nobody else desires. But when you turn 65, you're getting those paychecks every single month from the Canadian government, and your children don't have to worry about taking care of the elderly parents. So with all these things in place, why not take that risk if you know you're going to be safe? And additionally, we have a lot of incentives in the government to give you money to start a business, depending if it's something that Canada needs. I was lucky to be passionate about healthcare, and the government has recognized that we need to improve our healthcare system, and I was able to get grants for that. There's a lot of other problems that we face as a society, and the government wants to solve those problems, so they will take a portion of the risk off of your shoulders, as long as you're willing to take some risk yourself, and the government will give you grants for that. Not just grants. They will give you the research facilities. They will even give you the employees for that. Just you need to drive. You need to be somebody who won't give up and who has a solution in mind. And if the government recognizes that, they're going to take care of you.
Wow. Well, I didn't know that. That's definitely good information out there. And for people who doesn't know, like, well, you have this kind of support. If you really have a problem to solve, you really have a idea for solution, you can search for this kind of support from the government. So you actually graduated in 2022, right? And it was not the best year for employment, but you still managed to find a job. Do you have any advice for the new grads?
So I'm a little bit of an outlier for that. I've actually been working since I was 15. So I had a lot of job experience already, and I did get a co-op in high school with an internet service provider. So it wasn't like I was applying as a fresh graduate who doesn't have any experience. That being said, a lot of people did, and they were able to get jobs. I recognized in early 2020, I thought it was fairly obvious, at least to me, that this economic boom we were in, when everybody was getting like job offers from like big tech companies like Candy, it was very temporary. And I knew it was temporary because the key interest rates were like the lowest they've been in like 40 years. And if you just think about it and you sit down for a minute, well, if you have, really low interest loans or bonds from banks or governments, the best thing businesses can spend that money on is either buying up other businesses or getting more resources for your company, which is people, to hire more people. And I knew it wasn't going to last, so I actually got a job before the economic turn downwards. So that's why I got a job in, I think it was 2021, after completing my first year of college. I got to reinforce the fact that you got to be very aware of your environment. And I was very aware that I can have the easier path by getting a job during the economic boom than the economic downturn. So I kind of avoided that entire thing. However, that being said, my advice for people who are graduating in an economic downturn is basically be excited, be passionate. It's tough to hear that if you were forced to study something you don't like. And then my advice for that is go back to school or maybe take a sabbatical and learn more about yourself to see what your passion is and what you do like, if you can afford to do so. But I noticed something about you have is you spend a lot of your free time learning. You learned about AI, you learned Flutter, you made an app. That was great. I had a small 6-month period in college where I was unemployed, and I used that time to learn as well. I learned more about computer science, more about game development. That's just how much I like doing it. So I would just say if you're passionate enough about what you do, it's going to show to your next employer. I still do. I contract a lot of university graduates and students. It was basically a no-brainer to hire them because if they just showed me their portfolio, it's like, wow, you spent your free time doing this. Like you spent your free time making apps at 20 years old. Like, of course I'm gonna hire you because that means you like what you do. You might not be good at what you do yet, but you will be. And I want to invest in that. And just the same way how other founders have invested in me. But I would also say the most important thing is your connections. Something people forget when they go to college or university is it's not just your technical skills you're developing, it's also your soft skills. And I think you and I are very familiar with this. With all the group projects we've had in game development, there were some pretty talented and good people to work with, but there were a lot of people in those group projects that were difficult to work with. Those are probably the people who forgot to work on their communication skills or maybe just their likability and their personality. Because one of my executives I worked for described it perfectly. If I'm going to hire somebody, I'm going to be like spending 8 hours a day with them. I want to make sure whoever I spend 8 hours a day with, I like them. Sometimes it's really as simple as that. Just be more likable. There's books for that, like How to Win Friends and Influence People. You don't really necessarily need a book if you feel like that's too disingenuous. But it's simply, take feedback while you're young and apply it. Some people they forget that, living in society means that we need to learn how to be civil. And a lot of your personality traits, we're not all born perfect, but we can always improve them, and that's something we need to work on. I've taken a risk on a lot of people with my business by hiring them as fresh graduates, or maybe they're still in school. But a lot of it came down to that is, were you passionate about what you're doing? And are you somebody I want to spend 8 hours a day with? I know in Asia it's more than 8 hours too. It's like 12 hours. So it's like it's even more so. Like if I'm gonna spend 12 hours a day with you, I better like hanging out with you. Being an introvert might be a little bit of a difficult task for that, but I'm an introvert too. I had to learn how to talk to people, but the bottom line is I did learn. I think graduates should focus on that, not only being passionate about what they do, but develop their network and social skills. A lot of the jobs I got was because of people I knew. They're like, "Oh, I like you, and I'm gonna recommend you to this other guy I know who happens to be hiring." And the other guy's like, "Well, I like this guy, and if the guy I like likes this other guy, that means we're compatible." And that's literally how I got my most of my jobs.
Nice. Good to know. Yeah, like you said, I used to be an introvert too. I'm still am, and I would label myself as an introvert, so to avoid social interactions. Nowadays, I reach out to people, I talk to people. I think I've learned a bunch of things I never heard of. How do you get your clients, your contracts?
Yeah, so there's something called product market fit. I had to learn it the hard way because I was making products that didn't have a place in the market before I learned this term. So if you haven't started a business yet, good thing you know what this term is. So product market fit is essentially how well does what you're creating fit in the current marketplace? Is there a need for it? Is there a demand for it? And the best way to find it is using the social skills we talked about in the last question is talk to people, hopefully in the industry or maybe your ideal consumer. Talk to them. Tell them about your idea. Tell them, is this something you need? Or maybe what don't you like about this so I can improve it? My original concept for my medtech business was creating what my aunts and uncles did. I wanted to make an app that connects you to doctors remotely while wearing sensors so they can treat you remotely. Turns out Canada didn't have as much of demand for this because there were already implemented social services for that, like Rocket Doctor. So I had to find a different product market fit. I was going to networking events here in Ottawa. They're called Tech Founder Meetups. And I happened to walk across one of the vice presidents of this organization called SEMI, Canadian Excellence Mining Innovation or whatever. And he told me, well, this is amazing that you're creating this because did you know we need this in the mining industry? And I was like, no, I didn't know this. He's like, yeah, well, we send miners 30,000 feet below the surface of the earth and accidents do happen. But do you know how long it takes to go from an elevator shaft on the surface of the earth down to 30,000 feet? It takes a long time. And we have no idea what kind of help they need down there. We don't know if they need a defibrillator. We don't know if they need a certain medicine. We don't know if we can move them in certain areas. We don't know what they need. By having your sensors, we would be able to tell what they need. So if you happen to gear it towards miners, give me a call, give me an email. And the thing is, I wasn't doing that stuff. But the next day I started doing it. I talked to all my software engineers and my designers. I was like, hey guys, this is a potential customer. We need to drop everything and gear towards that because that's where the money is. And then I talked to somebody else. He was like a former director of CAA. It's like a driving organization. He mentioned how yeah, we have tow truck drivers, 24/7, and they drive to all kinds of places, but they're on call, right? So the thing about being on call is you might be called at 2, 3 a.m. You might be called right after having a couple of drinks at the bar with your friends. We need a way to track that our tow truck drivers are being responsible when responding to these calls. Are they drinking and driving? Are they driving while fatigued? Are they distracted? And sometimes, unfortunately, people get heart attacks while they're driving, or maybe a seizure while they're driving. We don't know, and we want to make sure their health trends is right. So he was telling me how if I created a prediction algorithm that says if these drivers wear it for a while and it can predict, a heart attack before it happens, or maybe if it can tell if the driver is either too tired or too drunk to drive, to flag them in the system, that's something they would consider buying. I was like, oh, you consider buying this? I wasn't doing that, but now I am. And that's the thing. I probably could have came up with this stuff on my own, but I didn't. But when people tell you what they need, it cannot get any more easier than that. So that's how you get contracts. One of the most recent contracts I saw the Department of National Defense doing, they put out a bid saying, hey, we need sensors for our soldiers on the field. And this is exactly what it needs to do. And I was like, I can do that. They ended up canceling the contract, unfortunately. But to find your product market fit, yes, you need to innovate and you should apply your own ideas to it. But the best source is always from the customer, the people who want to give you money. They will tell you exactly what they want.
So you find the requirements, the needs first, and then you work on the product.
Yes.
Not the other way around, right? You have a product and then the pitch to potential customers. That's gonna be riskier.
I think it actually gets rid of the risk, like when you already know what the customer needs. So I was doing it the other way around, and I wasted a lot of money creating products that nobody needed.
Right.
But that was a good
That's
lesson
my
to
app.
learn. Oh, really?
Yeah. Nobody uses it.
I tried using it. I wasn't able to download it, by the way, when you sent me that link. But I do, like, in my notes, like, I do keep track of like how much I can lift, and I don't have a graph or anything. So I actually do need your app, but I wasn't able to download it.
That was a personal need. I didn't do any marketing.
Okay.
I think it's this very small potential customer base, but it's okay. It's my first try. But yeah, let's talk about AI, because we talked about it, and you said you have to hire less new grads, less software engineers because of the AI. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier I took a risk on graduates and maybe some people who were still in school because I wanted to give them a job through school, just kind of like how my previous jobs gave to me. But the thing is, because they didn't work enough on their soft skills, their personality skills, they weren't pleasant to work with. Some of them, straight up took advantage of me because I was giving them remote work. They would just not do any work and expected to keep their jobs and still get paid for it. A challenge I get a lot as a young entrepreneur is people think to themselves, "Oh, he's young and foolish. I can take advantage of him." AI doesn't treat you that way. AI is just, a machine. If I asked any kind of AI agent, "Hey, I need this feature, and here are my requirements, and this is how you should do it, and I need it by this time and this day," it will just do it. That's a problem that people have that technology doesn't. So that's why I start gearing more towards AI agents specifically for my MVPs, and then hiring maybe more experienced engineers this time around rather than fresh grads to take that MVP and making it something more complete. But it also comes from a place of myself. I still have my full-time job as a software developer. I'm lucky to be in public now, but AI was still a thing when I was in private. And these founders, right? Or not even the founders, the stakeholders, they were I'm sure the conversations happening behind closed doors was like, do we really need these many developers if AI can either make one developer do the work of two or three, or maybe get rid of them all someday in the future? And it comes from a place of fear for me. But if I cross the line and look at it as a founder, well, I can also replace, my boss for it as well. So I think AI was very useful, and it definitely changes the workplace quite a bit, maybe more than we realize at this current moment.
So I think that's exactly the problem we face with young grads. They have to have this kind of work ethic, especially with the AI in the competition too. Yeah, thanks for that from an entrepreneur. About investment and funding, like I know you have government incentives, but do you have personal fundings?
Yes, absolutely. It should be clear most of the time the government will not invest in you if you don't have a personal stake, a personal risk. So you usually have to put in a percentage of your own money in order to unlock funding from the government, banks, or loans. In my early days of entrepreneurship, I spent a lot of time learning about this, how to unlock this kind of funding, and it was super important. And you can read all about the requirements online for your local jurisdiction. But essentially, like the one I sign up for is through FedDev Ontario, so the province that we live in. They will fund 50% of your research projects, only 50%, but it needs to be completed, and it needs you to have 50% of your own funding. I thought that was great. I was so passionate about what I'm doing. I was willing to pay 100% of it, but you're saying I can get a 50% discount? Sweet. There's even bigger government incentives out there. I think it's called IRAP. It's by the National Research Council of Canada. They will pay 80% of what you do, right? So I was already getting a 50% discount. Now you can get an 80% discount. The requirements are slightly tougher. You get audited by the National Research Council to see what you're researching does make sense and something we do need. But it's also, it is public funds, so they want to make sure they're using their money properly. But there's some other requirements like having two full-time employees. But it's kind of like a video game, right? Like you have this list of requirements, you meet those requirements, and then you can unlock that funding. I went about it a little bit of a different way. So I moved to Ottawa in 2019. I paid for hotels and I paid for like boarding when I was younger as a teenager, but I never really rented my own house or at least my own room in a house until I was, 18 and living on my own. And I was paying the landlord at the time like $650 a month. And there was five people in that house. So, 650 times five, I was like, oh wow, this guy's making a lot of money for doing a whole lot of nothing. And one of my hobbies is calculating the cost of businesses, how much they charge people, and how much, maybe potential profit they might be making. So I did that math with a online mortgage calculator and how much he was charging us. And I was like, wow, he's making like quite a bit of money per month. So I made it like a personal goal of mine to also become a landlord myself, and I eventually did. But I think this is where I differ with some people, which is fine either way. But essentially, people want to spend money on their interests, and my interest happens to be entrepreneurship. So with all the profits I made from my landlording endeavors, I have that money to put into my business, other businesses, and just reinvest it. Other people with their interests, it might be fashion, they might be buying clothes instead. But I learned that I could have nearly perpetual income by owning a property, renting it out, and using the profits and funneling that into my other businesses. So, in a weird way, it gave me a sense of security that I can like develop my businesses with a steady stream of income, even if I lost my job. So that's the way I set up my own safety net. But it can also be argued that if you're financially responsible and you've developed your personal credit rating, when you start a business, your business doesn't have a credit score for 2 years, around that much, unless you start producing revenue very early on. Then you can probably get it in like 6 months or less. But you can take a you can take a business loan on your personal credit score, credit rating. So if you started a business, we have BDC, so that's the Business Development Bank of Canada, or Bank of whatever. It's a business bank created by Canada, and essentially, they will give you, if you're willing to take that personal risk, because even if the business fails, it's not like you can just close the business and that debt goes away. It's on you. But that's another way of making money. If you really believe that much in your business, you can take loans as well. And those are the three avenues that I've explored, funding money into my own business, not only for my job, but also for my other business of being a landlord, taking loans taking grants from the government, and also taking loans from banks,
Yeah.
because a lot of people who believe in you, especially investors. There's a lot of people out there who want control over their investments. If you go to meetups, so I mentioned I went to an entrepreneurship meetup. There's events happening all the time for startups. I think we have one happening in about 2 weeks called Startup World Cup. Just go there, just network, and use your personality that I told you to develop in the earlier questions. Just talk to investors, be excited, be passionate, tell them about your idea. If you get the investor just as excited as you are in your business, they'll put money in, and they want to see you succeed.
Nice.
Well, mostly because they want to make their money back, but
Yeah. Yeah, it's mutual benefits. That's good. What kind of business do you register as? Like a solo proprietorship or like a corporation or whatever? I don't know.
So I made a limited liability corporation. Essentially, the reason I went incorporated federally is number one, I wanted to operate in all of Canada, so it made sense to just bite the bullet and just get registered. For me, it wasn't a huge financial burden at all. I think it's like maybe $150 to $200 to register your business, and that way you get to reserve your business name. It also removes a lot of liability from me. So one of my businesses is medtech, like I mentioned, and that involves people's health. I'm always doing my best. I want to take care of my people, but mistakes happen, or sometimes people are opportunistic and they want to, maybe sue the company to for their own financial gains. That removes a certain level of liability from myself. I mentioned that I also have a landlording business where I rent out houses. It would be a huge hit to me if one of my medtech customers was to sue me because of whatever reason, And then I also lose my landlording business. By creating these separate entities, I am reducing my risk. And another reason is the potential tax benefits you get once you reach a certain level of revenue. You always want to reduce your taxes if you can, so that you can reinvest in yourself. But it's also intellectual property. So I can register my inventions, my creations, and my research as intellectual property owned by my business. And intellectual property is, some argue, better than real estate property. But it's at the end of the day, they're both property, right? You can rent it out, you can license it, you can sell it, you can do a lot of things with it. And I do that through my business instead of myself, because if I do it through myself, I'm just essentially taxed higher because I already have a full-time job and other businesses and other incomes. Whereas my business as its own separate entity, it's all enclosed. So it just makes more sense from a financial auditing perspective. There's a lot of research that goes into this, and I encourage your readers or your viewers to research something called a holdco, so a holding company, and then there's an opco, an operating company. If you look at the architecture of those two things, it's kind of like programming. It's kind of like inheritance. It just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, yeah, appreciate it. I only had like a vague knowledge about those corporation types, but it's good that you make it clear. I really appreciate it's getting like almost an hour, more than an hour.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I really appreciate your genuine sharing of the knowledge. I think the audience is gonna appreciate that too. Is there any other thing you want to share, or we'll definitely keep in touch because I've got a bunch of
Absolutely.
questions to ask
Yeah,
you
no,
later.
ask away. Yeah, no, I remember being, I'm sure everyone can remember being, as a fresh graduate from university, and you've gone your entire life maybe being a little bit sheltered with your parents, if you come from a good family, and you spend your entire life in education, and now you're in the real world, and it's really scary. And some of your viewers might be inclined to, maybe react to that kind of fear. Some people might want to go back to school and delay the inevitable. Some might want to do other things, but all I can say is embrace it, have fun. Um, you're in this early stage of your life just once, and it does get better, but the only way is through. And I would just say just go through with it, because you will learn a lot about yourself. You might learn that your field isn't for you, but imagine like the fun adventure you're gonna have going from whatever you thought you thought your life was meant for, and discovering what your life was actually meant for. I've seen some incredible people do incredible things, and it's only through trying and failing. One of the things we say in entrepreneurship is just fail fast so that you can learn where what not to do and where not to go. So, manage your anxiety and just push through is all I can really say. And whenever you need advice, well, we live in a world where you have a literal, interface to ask a neural network that has scraped the entire internet to serve you information. So if you're ever feeling lost, look for mentors, look for people around you. Interview people who might be a couple of years ahead of you where you may want to be. But if you have nothing else, now you can ask AI, and AI can give you a small timeline of what you can do, or an actionable plan. So you're living in one of the best eras to be graduating right now.